Hey y'all, happy Monday. Today we are talking about displaying data. So let's get started. On page 2 of your packet, we're first going to talk about dot plots. A dot plot displays data graphically using a small dot or sometimes an X for each data piece. The data points are ordered from least to greatest, from smallest to biggest. Now the shape of a dot plot can vary. Data can take on 3 different shapes. So if the data looks like this right here, is what we call symmetric. However, if the data looks like this right here, you see most of the data is on the left, so we call that skewed right. I know that seems backwards, but that's just how it is. If most of the data is on the left side of the graph, the data is skewed right. And when the data is skewed right, we know the mean is greater than the median. Now, dot plots can also look kind of like that right there, where this time most of the data is on the right, so we call this skewed left, still backwards. And when your data is skewed left, the mean is less than the median. Now, the spread is the variability in the data points, and it describes how far apart the data is from one another. This is also represented by the range. And finally, the center. There's 2 measures of center that are really important, median and mean. The median and mean both represent the center of the data. When the data is skewed, either right or left, it doesn't matter which way it's skewed, then the median is the best representation of the data, or of the center of the data. However, when the data is symmetric, then the mean is the best representation of the center of the data. Okay, now that all of that is out of the way, let's look at some examples. So in number 1, it says the dot plot on the left represents the number of dollars in allowance that students receive each week in Miss Watley's class. Identify the following: the mean, the median, the mode, and the range. So let's look at this dot plot. We first need to identify the mean. So to find the mean, we actually need to add up all of these data points and then divide by the number of points. So the way I'm going to do this is these 2 dots that represent zeros, that's going to be 0. But these 2 dots that represent 2, 2 plus 2 is 4. We've got 3 dots that represent 4. 4 times 3 is 12. Okay, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dots that represent 5. So 5 times 5 is 25. We have 2 dots that represent 6. 6 times 2 is 12. Oops. Okay, we've got 1 dot that represents 7, so that's 7. 2 dots representing 8, so that's 16. Let's see if I can do a better 6. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 dots representing 10, so that's 40. 1 dot representing 11. And then 2 dots representing 12, so that's 24. And finally, 1 dot representing 15. Okay, so now that I've kind of gone through each row or each column, I'm going to add this in my calculator. And when I add up 4 plus 12 plus 25 plus 12 plus 7 plus 16 plus 40 plus 11 plus 24 plus 15, and I put that in my calculator and add it up, I get 166. So now I'm going to divide 166 by the number of data points. So I see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So I'm dividing 166 by 25. And when I put that into my calculator, I get 6.64. So that is the average amount of allowance that the students in Ms. Watley's class earn, $6.64. Now let's find the median. Okay, as you remember, the median is the very center of all of the data. So we're just going to work our way towards the center by crossing off data points from each side until we get to the center. Okay, so I'm going to start by crossing off this 0 right here, and I'm going to cross off this 15 right here. Now I'm going to go back. I'm going to cross off this second 0, and I'm going to cross off this 12. Now I'm going to cross off this 2, and I'm going to cross off this second 12. Now I'm going to cross off the second 2, and I'm going to cross off the 11. I'm going to cross off this first 4 and the first 10, the second 4 and the second 10, the third 4, the third 10, the first 5, the last 10, second 5, first 8, third 5, last 8, 5, 7, 5, 6. And I'm left with a point in the middle. That's 6. So 6 is the median. That means that $6 is the median. Okay, now the mode. Remember, the mode is the term that occurs most often. So what has the most dots? Well, when I look, I have 5 dots at 5. So 5 is the mode. And finally, the range. The range is how spread out the data is. So I take the biggest data point, 15, and I subtract from it the very smallest, which is 0. 15 minus 0 is 15. So that is our range. Okay, moving on to page 3. Number 2, the dot plot on the right represents Ryland's science grades this quarter. Identify the following. Again, we're talking about the mean, median, mode, range, but we're also going to answer this question, which measure of center best represents the data and why? Okay, so to find the mean, we know we need to add everything up, and then we need to divide by the number of points. Okay, so I know that this right here is 60. Here I've got 75 times 3, so 3 times 75. Here I've got 80. Here I've got 4 times 85. Here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 90. I've got 2 times 95. And I have 3 times 100. Okay, so I'm going to put all of this into my calculator. And when I put all of that into my calculator, I find that it adds up to 1,735. And I'm going to divide that by the number of data points. Well, when I count them, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So I'm dividing 1,735 by 20. And when I put that into my calculator, I end up with 86.75. So that is the average for Ryland's grades. Now let's find the median. Okay, remember the median is the middle data point. So I'm going to just cross them off and work my way towards the center. So I'm going to mark off that 60 and this first 100. Then I'm going to mark off a 75 and another 100, another 75, a 100, the last 75, and a 95, this 80, and that last 95. Now I mark off this 85 and this 90, this 85, this 90, this 85, this 90, this 85, this 90, and I'm left with 2 data points in the middle. So normally I would say that those both represent 90. I need to add them together and divide by 2, but they're both the same number. So I know that if I add them together, 180 divided by 2, I still get 90. So my median is 90. Okay, moving on, our mode. What number occurs most often? Well, you can see very clearly that I've got the most dots stacked at 90. So 90 is also our mode. And finally, our range. To find the range, we take our biggest data point, 100, and we subtract the smallest, 60. So 100 minus 60. When I don't even need to put that into my calculator, but that is 40. So 40 is our range. Now let's talk about this question. This is probably the hardest one for this example. Which measure of center best represents this data and why? Well, when I look at this data, notice how a lot of the data is over here on this side, on the right-hand side, right? Well, that means that the data is skewed left. So the data is skewed left. I know this because most of the data is on the right. I also know this because I can compare my mean to my median. Okay, so when data is skewed left, the mean is smaller than the median. And when we look at it, 86.75 is definitely smaller than 90. So it just confirms that the data is skewed left. Okay, well, let's go back to page 2. I want to point out this point right here. When the data is skewed, the median is the best representation of the data. So the median is the best measure of center. Okay, so long answer, but our answer is the median. Which measure of center best represents this data and why? The median is the best measure of center. It best represents this data because it is skewed left. Moving on to number 3, constructing a dot plot. The data set below gives pulse rates in beats per minute for a group of 30 students. So below is a number line with a minimum value of 56 at the left side. So we see that right here. Okay. And a maximum value of 92 at the right side. So the steps that we're going to take to construct a dot plot. We're going to give the number line a title. We always have to title our graphs. So I'm just going to call it a real fancy name, pulse rates. You could have called it something more specific, pulse rates of students, for example, but pulse rates tells us what it's about. Now, B, for each value in the data set, put a dot above that value on the number line. When a value occurs more than once, stack the dots. Okay? Now that we know that, let's get started. So I'm going to start with just the very first 2 points, 68 and 72. So I'm just kind of going by these kind of columns like this. So 68 and 72 is what I'm starting with. So 68, I'm going to put a dot. And because I'm going to be making a lot of these, I'm going to use some teacher magic. So 68 and 72. Okay, moving on to the next column, 60 and 56. 76 and 88. 68 and 76. $64 and $80. $80 and $68. $72 and $80. $76 and $84. $92 and $64. $68 and $80. $56 and $72. $72 and $64. $68 and $68. $60 and $76. And finally, $84 and $72. Okay, so now we have constructed our dot plot. So your dot plot should look just like mine. So we first need to find the mean. Well, we're going to add everything up and divide by the number of data points. So when I add everything up, I'm just saying 56 plus 56, or I could put in my calculator 2 times 56 plus 2 times 60 plus 3 times 64 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 times 68, and so on. I would just keep going on down, and I put that all in my calculator. And when I do that, I find that it all adds up to 2,164. Now we're going to divide that by the number of data points. And I don't even need to count because it tells me 30 students. So I know it's 30. So when I divide 2,164 by 30, I end up with 72.13 repeating. So that right there is our mean. That's our average. Now let's find the median. To find the median, I'm just going to work my way towards the center of the data. So I'm going to start by marking off that 56 and this 92. Then I'm going to mark off the second 56 and this 88. Now I'm going to mark off that 60 and this 84, this 60, and this 84, 64, and 80, 64, and 80, 64, and 80, 68, and 80, 68, 76, 68, 76, 68, 76, 68, 76, 68, 72, 72, and I'm left with 2 data points in the middle that are both 72. So even if I were to add them together and divide by 2, I still would get the median to be 72. Okay, moving on to the mode. What data point occurs most often? Well, I can see very clearly that this occurs the most often. I have 6 dots at 68. I only have 5 dots at 72, so it's close, but it's not a mode. So 68 is our mode. It's the number that occurs most often. And finally, the range. So how spread out the data is. So we're going to start with our biggest data point, 92, and subtract from that the smallest, 56. 92 minus 56, when I put that into my calculator, I get 36. So 36 is our range.